Like Bob says, that was his only time that he ever seen Gene have alcohol on his lips.
Man, can you imagine what the fans would have thought? Thinking that back then in the 70s, those guys were just doing that every night. And one thing I wanted to ask you real quickly is when Kiss was in their biggest heyday, they were critically bashed, right, left, in between. What did those guys think when they saw some of the critical reviews of their concerts and their records? I mean, did it matter at all to them, or did they just kind of laugh all the way to the bank?
In the beginning, it kind of affected them. It affected Gene and Paul. They would see these reviews, and they would get pissed off and things like that. But I think Gene learned over the years that bad press is just as good as is better than no press.
And he just wouldn't take it to heart after a while?
Yeah, he wouldn't take it to heart because, his bank account would say different.
Yeah. Right. Well, and there's always that argument that, hey, 20 million people can't be wrong. They
right.
I mean,
all throughout the years, they had this hardcore... Kiss fans are the best fans in the world. I mean, for a rock and roll band, they should really thank God for the fans that they have, because they are the most... They're very critical of the band. I see that now. I'm on the internet a lot, and they criticize the band, and they say this, that, but they're dedicated. They're the most dedicated. It's like a family. Inside your family, you argue with your brothers and sisters, but you still love them.
Right. They may complain about the show or the record, but they're going to the show and they're buying the records.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, we talked a little bit earlier that the band had kind of the early band had a competition about who could get the best celebrity girlfriend, and we won't even get into, or we could at some point get into how lame Ace was trying to pick up chicks. Somebody called and said that they had the best of both worlds, that they were rock stars, and yet without the makeup they were totally anonymous. But that worked against Ace as far as picking girls up, right?
Oh yeah.
He couldn't convince him that he was who he was.
There was an incident. I was there. I wasn't friends with. It was weird. Bob was best friends with Ace at the time, and there was a place called Glen Island Casino in New Rochelle, New York. It was a real cool rock and roll place. It was a ballroom on the water, right on the Atlantic Ocean, and it was a beautiful place. And one day I was there with a bunch of friends of mine, and I saw Bob McAdams, and when you saw Bob, you knew Ace was with him. And we were young kids at the time. We were only 18, whatever. And we saw Ace there, and he was trying to pick up this girl, and he had to pull up his shirt to show the tattoo on the side of his arm. He had to pull out the license.
Right, the driver's
just to prove he was Ace Frehley.
Right.
And nobody would believe him because they only knew him with their makeup on, and Ace had a hard time.
Yeah. Now Gene Simmons, you're talking Diana Ross, Shannon Tweed, who was it Penthouse or Playboy?
Yeah, Playboy.
Okay. You're also talking about Cher. Now she hated Ace's guts, right?
Oh yeah, she didn't get along with him at all. She avoided him like the plague.
And the Diana Ross story is a wild one too, in the book, and that's obviously Bob's story, but I'm sure you know it. First off, Bob's recollection of Diana Ross when she came to visit Kiss while they were rehearsing, horrendous B.O.
Yeah, but, it might have been a bad day. You can't go by one. Yeah, I mean, Bob does say she was a wonderful, nice person,
yeah,
but she might have had a bad day that day. This is, how odors linger with you, and you remember times because of odors?
Yes.
I guess that's what happened to Bob.
And it might have been a roadie that walked by or something, too. We really don't know for sure.
But did you go into the further story about Diana? About the Spears?
Oh,
yeah. That's where we were going to get to that.
Ace was not only an anti-Semite, but also had a little bit of a racist in him, right?
Well, he was chiding Gene all that day because Gene was all excited that Diana was going to show up at their rehearsal, and this was out in L.A. And Bob always said that Kiss always had really good food, at the rehearsals, big layout of food, and they'd eat very well and everything. So Ace kept on. Chiding on Gene, going, how come we don't have any ribs today? How come there's no watermelon out there? And, all these racist remarks about food, and Gene was just putting up with it. So then Diana showed up, and Gene was like they took a break, and Gene was like kissing Diana and making out with her, and he was all happy that day. And she says, all right, Gene, I got to go. And Paul's, saying, like, come on, we got to rehearse. And they thought Diana left the building. So when they went back up on the stage to test the mics to turn the PA back on, Ace started yelling over the microphone, hey, Diana, come back. You forgot your spears. There's spears all over the stage. Oh, man. And Gene and Paul are like, what are you doing? And all of a sudden, Bob looks, and Diana didn't leave the building. She just stayed in the hallway with her entourage because she didn't want to make them nervous and listen to them practice some more.
And they came back in, and she backed Ace right down, didn't she?
She stared at him, and Gene is a very hard worker, and Bob's never seen this. Gene put his bass down and said, no more rehearsal for today, and that was so unlike Gene. But that's part, crazy antics. That's what it was. It was insane, in poor taste antics on Ace parts.
I mean, how much of his behavior can you write off to drugs and alcohol? I mean, almost all of it.
Well, I mean, you got to have some basis for it. So,
yeah.
When you're sober, you might. I mean, the alcohol and the drugs, added on to it and amplified the actions. But I've been with Ace when he was sober, and he was just as crazy.
Oh, right. Okay. And did things that were in equally poor taste, right?
Yes.
Hey, one of the stories I want to talk about, and I don't know how much detail you can get into it, because I'm not sure if it was a story told by you or Bob in the book, but and admittedly it was a story that you had heard third hand, although whoever did relate the story said, we have this on real good authority from very good sources.
Oh.
Well, you know the story I'm going to talk about.
Yes, I do now.
The argument between Peter and Ace over who performed oral sex on whom first, that they did it to each other.
Yeah. No, that came from really good sources, that story. I wouldn't have put it in the book if I didn't hear it from 3 different people. And I could even comment further on it, and I won't.
But they got into an argument over who did it to who, which of them first, because they had done it to each other, apparently.
Yeah, they got into this big drunken argument. No, you first. You got you got it first. Everybody thought they were arguing at this party, that they were arguing over a girl who got fellatio from a girl first.
But it was from each other.
But it was from each other.
Yeah,
as the argument got louder and progressed, they were arguing who did it to who first.
I got to be honest with you. At that point in time in the book yesterday, I went, ew, and put it down for about 5 minutes. But then I couldn't leave it down. I had to pick it back up. And, one of the other cool things that we haven't mentioned yet is that as bad as Ace's drinking and drug problems were, you're of the opinion that Peter Criss had worse problems.
Oh, yeah, he was hardcore drugs. He was into heroin.
And that they actually had a roadie who could put the makeup on and fill in for him, and who actually did fill in shows in California.
And it has happened, and it happened recently in the new tour, the reunion tour.
Oh, you're kidding!
In Columbus, Georgia.
You're kidding, and that's never come back to bite the band.
Well, that Columbus, Georgia one, they announced it, and they said we're going to have a stand-in for Peter, and they had his roadie come on with his makeup, and then half the fans. It was a big controversial thing with Kiss, and I heard the inside story. They were saying they were saying in public that Peter got a shot in his arm, and then he had tendonitis and all this stuff, and he couldn't perform.
Right.
But I mean, he bounced back like the next night. So I don't know. You know.
You mentioned tendonitis, and I guess Ace's catch-all was bronchitis. If he ever was too wasted to make a show, he would claim that he had bronchitis.
Yeah, he constantly had bronchitis.
Right. Now, there's a real interesting section in the book, and I always thought this was ironic when the albums came out, but being on the inside of Kiss, it must have been 10 times as ironic and probably more than that annoying when they made this kind of questionable marketing decision back when Kiss was at its height to do the 4 solo albums.
Oh, yeah.
It must have, like you said, Peter and Ace were terribly lazy, and Paul and Gene held everything together, did all the business, did all the work, and it must have been very annoying to them when Ace's album was the only one that produced a hit single.
Yeah, it was. And Ace, and it went to Ace's head, his ego, because whenever, after that happened, and they were going back to do a new Kiss album, whatever they said to Ace, and if he didn't like, he would retort with, well, I had a number 1, I had the single hit off my solo album. My solo album did the best out of all of you, so it was his retort, and it got kind of aggravating, and that was egos clashing and and your head blowing up.
That kind of gave him some leverage within the band, though, huh?
Yeah, it did, and he used it